Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones that you can't solve right now, and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. A quick note for new listeners. If this is your first time joining us, I need to give you a heads up that part of the plan with this show is this long intro, which usually goes on for roughly 15 minutes. If you want to get straight to the story, there is a timestamp in the show description that will get you straight there. But aside from the little bit of promotion I'm about to go into right now, the intro does serve a purpose, which I'll get into. So I think, especially if it's your first couple of nights, I think it's worth sitting through the intro to sort of get a sense of this show. Now, many podcasts put their promotion and cup rattling halfway through or at the end of the show. But because if all goes well, you're going to be asleep long before we get there, I need to put the business stuff up front. As I said, there is a timestamp in the show notes for the main story, so I absolutely do not take it personally if you decide you'd rather skip to that. Having said that, I'd like to thank the listeners that support the show or have ever supported the show on Patreon. You have all been instrumental in helping me to keep the show running, and also kind of done a little bit to help prove the value of this show to people. So whether you back the show for a month or a few, at any level, I'm truly grateful for the support that you've provided. So if you are someone who has been listening to the show regularly and you find that it helps you to get a good night's sleep, whether weekly, nightly, or however often you listen, and you would like to help me keep the show running and available for free to everybody, I'd like you to take a look at patron.sleepytimetales.net to go to my Patreon and have a look at what's available to people who would like to provide some support from as little as $1 a month. There are weekless bonus minisodes to special edits of standard episodes without this promotional part, or even story-only edits, depending on the level that you sign up as. So there is something there for everybody, and at whatever level you can support. I am going to be making a few changes to the Patreon in March, so it's definitely worth keeping an eye on. I'm going to give more value to the $5 level. I'm going to introduce a new $2 level, and I'm going to be putting a cap on at the $1. So everyone is a current member or who signs up at $1 a month up to the end of February, you will remain at the level that you're at and will carry on receiving what you're currently receiving. But going forward, that's going to be sort of phased out. There's going to be a $2 and a $5 level going forward. So if you do have $1 a month to spare and you would like to support Sleepy Time Tales, jump on there by the end of February and sign up for that. Otherwise, keep an eye out for the new stuff that's going to be coming soon. And also, obviously, keep an ear out on the show. I'm going to go into that in the next few weeks. So if you're finding the show beneficial and have the means and the inclination to help me keep the show going and available for hundreds of people to help them get a good night's sleep, please consider signing up at whatever level is comfortable to you to continue supporting my work. But there's another huge way you can help to spread the word. If there is someone else in your life you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I can find out and can thank you. I'll thank you here on the episode and on the social media in question. You can find me at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram and Twitter, and Sleepy Time Tales podcast on Facebook. Speaking of Facebook, I got a very nice recommendation a couple of days ago from Christina, who is someone she's one of those 3:30 in the morning wake up people. which I understand. That one really is unfortunate. And this show is, she's finding the show helpful to her to help her sleep. So thank you very much, Christina, for the message. I'm glad to be here for you, and I'm glad that I'm helping. Here's to many more rested nights. If anybody else sends a recommendation or review on Facebook or wherever else as well, or does a review on any of their podcast apps and I find it, I'll also give you a shout out here. So again, thanks, Christina. Another way to really help the show, if you've just stumbled across it and are finding it useful to you, is subscribe in whatever service you use. That sort of thing really does help it spread. It's an important metric, particularly on Apple and Spotify. So if you found the show there, subscribe and it will be put up in front of people and I can help even more. Last but not least bit of business is I need to give a shout out to the music, which is Undesir Bakumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff that they release under various names that I recommend that people take a look at. Thank you very much. Back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It seems a bit of a strange idea, doesn't it? I mean, it's a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But in this 21st century, with stresses and strains of modern life, lack of sleep is a health crisis. And this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can reach to get a restful night. I'm sure if you're here, you realize you're not alone in the world, that you lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, your emotions in turmoil and stressed about the anxieties of 21st century life. Are you someone who wakes up in the middle of the night and you just can't quite doze back over 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby, and my parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them, sleep was always a struggle for me. I discovered eventually that droning male voices have a tendency to put me out almost like a sedative. I discovered this when I was listening to when I was younger, mostly video game podcasts, and in the dark in bed, because I couldn't sleep, and I would suddenly find myself waking up at the end of the episode, having missed everything I was listening to. I think the combination of lying still in the dark and the voices in the background was just enough to help me overcome those challenges that I'd been having. I eventually discovered that there are podcasts and facilities out there specifically intended to help people sleep. Bedtime stories read by people with strange and boring voices to help those that it could to sleep. And I tried a couple that worked quite nicely for me, but there were other people that they didn't work for various reasons. So I thought, I've got a boring, droning male voice and a tendency to go on and on about things. So let me give it a try and see how it goes. I'm nearly a year into this project, and so far it's going pretty well. So here I am doing my part to help other people. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It's the most controversial part of the show. It's the thing that I get the most negative feedback on. But when I have mentioned it, I've also gotten a lot of positive feedback from regular listeners, because this long intro is here for a reason. It goes on for roughly 15 minutes in total, and while it's not necessarily for everybody, it does serve a couple of purposes. The first thing I need to do is actually make the case for Sleepy Time Tales to new listeners. Why on earth would you be listening to a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? I'm going to make a case for this quite strange idea, and explain how it works and the sort of different ways to engage with it. For people who've been with the show for quite a while, there's actually a secondary purpose, though. For them, this show, or this intro rather, is it's part of the process that we do to help create a space and prepare their minds and sort of state of mind and themselves for this man, I've done this like 50 odd times and I've suddenly lost track of where I was. For all the listeners, we're trying to create a new habit. Insomnia is actually pretty much a habit. We've come to associate sleep and our sleep spaces with stress and worry, and I'm trying to help create a new habit here. So I drone on and on before getting to the story that you're here to listen to give you an opportunity to start preparing that space. Now's the time. Pop your earbuds in, brush your teeth, have a glass of water. Make sure your room that you're sleeping in is warm but not too warm. Get yourself a nice blanket to wrap yourself in and settle down, ready to sleep. We're building a space together, a nest or a little cabin in the woods, whatever you need to associate it with this idea that we are together going to help you get a good night's sleep. Now, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to sleep podcasts, it's much like those video game podcasts that used to put me to sleep back in the old days. I need something to listen to, something that I'm actually interested in, that engages my mind, but isn't so fascinating and so awesome that I just can't bear to fall asleep to it. I need a story or event that lets me keep my mind on something specific to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough on not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for me. But a lot of people also like white noise and just things to drone in the background. For some people, it may be sound of waves or the sound of rain, or some dude who's just droning on and on and on about nothing in particular, nothing particularly interesting. Whatever you engage or however you engage with the show, that's up to you. What matters is that it's helping you. Tonight's reading, for your edification and your interest, but not being too interesting, is from an old book called The Ship of Coral by Vere Stacpoole. It's sort of early stages. It seems to be somewhat Robinson Crusoe-esque sort of shipwreck story about two men that get wrecked in the Caribbean. It takes a little bit of a dark turn, but not overly concerning, I don't think. And amazingly well written. It's got like a really beautiful turn of phrase, and I'm wondering actually, should I stick with a story for a couple of consecutive weeks or something like that? Maybe, I don't know. I wonder if listeners would find that interesting or less interesting or more interesting to have maybe a month of one story rather than something new every time. But then also don't want to create the expectation of the new step of the story. So, I don't know. There's something to think about, I think. The story tonight, it's an interesting one, but like I say, it tends to go around and it's not super gripping, but whatever happens, as you listen to the story, it's important that you don't try to force sleep. Keep a light mental grip on the story as I'm telling it, but just let sleep come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's important that you don't feel pressurized. It may not work on your first night. It may make it a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange to you. Maybe one episode isn't long enough. I do recommend that if you're new to the show, you give it at least 2 or 3 nights to see if it does work for you. There's a certain resistance, I think, that comes to the idea of just like listening to some strange guy as you're trying to sleep and not sure if you can really trust yourself with me, even though I'm probably very far away from you, from where you are right now. But I don't want to do anything to disturb your sleep or give you unpleasant rest. Also importantly, as I said, bad sleep is a habit, and if you're prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, it may take a while for this to work for you, to create a new habit. So queue up a few episodes or just run through the backlog. What I tend to do with sleep podcasts is I've got like the most recent 10 episodes downloaded all the time, and I just start with the most recent one and let them run. I lie in the dark with my earbuds and just let them go. Often I wake up at 3 a.m. because that's a new one for me. I fall asleep okay these days, but that's a middle of the night wake up is a tricky one. And if the show is still running, I just pop my earbuds in and waft back to sleep. Sometimes I even wake up 30 minutes before my alarm goes. Usually what I do in those cases is I just carry on listening and it knocks me right back out. Let me tell you that 30 minutes is sometimes the most restful part of my night. There's something about allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that is just deeply, deeply satisfying. And so you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who is elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You'll always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes their lives harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way. To help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope. One thing that's quite central with my show these days, and for me as I do this, is I want kindness to be more central to my life and how I engage with people. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And I need you to be kind to yourself. Because if you beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping, this is all wasted effort. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge of the sleep, even with me here trying to help. Frustration is a great enemy of a good night's sleep. And the intention with this podcast is to try to short circuit that frustration, to distract that feeling that we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and we can try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep can feel like an enemy, but it's not your enemy. It's a natural part of our life that we have been pulled away from, that we stress about and that we resist while we worry about life and while progress shines bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. The Ship of Coral by H. de Vere Stacpoole. New York, Duffield and Company, 1911. Jean-Francois Denant. The sea lay blue to the far horizon. Blue. Our blue is but a name till you have seen the sea that breaks around the Bahamas and gives anchorage to the tall ships at Port Royal. That great sheet of blue water stretching from Cape Catoche to the Windward Islands, and from Yucatan to beyond the Bahamas, studded with banks and keys and reefs. The old sea of the buccaneers shot over with the doings of Kidd and Singleton and Horn. On the salt white sand in the blinding dazzle of sunlight, the waves were falling, clear green, crystalline, each lovely as a jewel. The crying of the gulls loud all the morning had died down with the high afternoon and high tide. The wind had faded, as though withered by the sun. Just at the moment of high tide, the sea makes a pause in its eternal labour. The great act of systole has been accomplished, and, break the waves as they may, the profound languor of the ocean makes itself heard and felt. Gaspard Cadillac, ex-stoker of the Rhone, sitting with his back against a palm tree, cleaning an old tobacco pipe and absorbed in the job, felt this pause and hold up in nature just as the gulls felt it, just as much and just as little as they. I have raised my horizon, said the sea. I have lifted fleets towards heaven, hidden reefs. I have drained the occidental shores and domed with water the Indies. I rest from my labours, and I dream. Our man beneath the tree was a Moko. The French Navy is divided into two great classes, the men from the south and the men from the north, the Moko and the Ponantes. Gaspard was a man from the south, a Provençal, dark, handsome in a rough way, wiry and vivid. Yves, his bosom companion, also a stoker of the Rhone, and the only survivor with Gaspard of the wreck of that ill-fated shift, was a Ponantes, a big man from Bretagne with a blonde beard. Yves was over away on the other side of the little island, now hunting for what he might find in the rock pools and creeks. Away out there in a right line from where Gaspard was sitting beneath the palm trees, under the blinding dazzle of the sea, the Rhone was lying with her bottom ripped out, her boilers burst, her boats hanging smashed at her davits. A horrible travesty of a ship, knocked under the sea as if with the blow of a giant's fist, a raffle of ropes, machinery, and corpses. The gods had been very good to Gaspard and Yves, and the Gaspard had, by the direction of the gods, been the salvation of Yves. The whole catastrophe had come like a clap of thunder on a moonlit sea. The har-rip of the reef that had been waiting 1,000,000 years for the Rhone, the screaming of scalding steam and scalded men, a wild bellow from the siren, the roar of the boilers opening out, and the shout of the lifting decks, all that so thunderous and apocalyptic, so full of tragedy and torment and woe, filled the night for a moment for miles around, and then there was nothing but the moonlit sea. Yves was a good swimmer, but his heart had gone out in him. He had been held down under water by the suck of the sinking ship, and he would have drowned to a certainty only for Gaspard, who was a bad swimmer, but a bad drowner. The wiry Provençal, courageous as a rat, had held Yves' head above the water till Yves felt the sea slapping him in the face, and saw a great spar lifting and dripping in the moonlight, saw Gaspard seize the spar, a picture almost instantaneous, a picture that told him at once the truth and made him strike out for safety. The set of the current had carried the spar to the islet. One might have fancied that the sea, repenting for that sin of hers, had determined to save these last two survivors of the Rhone. But the sea cared for the men as much as she cared for the spar, less, for they were lighter. Boxes and crates had come drifting ashore, getting caught and tangled in the reef mesh to eastward of the islet. A horrible abundance of provisions, all sorts of articles from the cargo, corpses, spars, everything yet nothing, pounding about in the desolate reef-strewn water, made the east side of the islet a place to avoid. The two men in the few days since the wreck had salved enough food to last them for months. There was a spring of water amidst the low bay cedar bushes that stretched from shore edge to shore edge. The islet was in a trade track, and they were certain of near rescue. All these circumstances made them easy of mind and made a holiday of the episode. Gaspard, having cleaned the pipe to his satisfaction, filled it with tobacco and lit it. Then he lay on his back with his head in the scanty shade of the palm fronds, the peak of his cap over his eyes, the smoke from his pipe curling upwards in the windless air. Windless for a moment only. The tide had turned, and with the turn of the tide, a faint breathing shook the palm tops against the blue. Maybe it was the breeze carrying the voices nearer, but the crying of the gulls seemed to louden with the turning tide. Jean-François de Nantes. Jean-François, Jean-François, Jean-François de Nantes, Jean-François, Jean-François. The old interminable song of the French Navy, immortalized by Loti, sang in the ears of Moko as he lay, blissful, forgetful, seeing pictures, dreaming dreams. Now he was in the stokehold of the Rhone, feeding furnace number 2. He could feel the cotton waste protecting his hands from the heat of the rake. He could hear the clatter of the ash lift and the boom of the sea. High, 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 the weary, querulous call of the gulls brought up the Tamalpais, a 3-master in which he had served for a voyage. High, high, high. It was the very voices of the men hauling on the halyards. He could see the topsails bellying to the wind, the great sails hulled hard against the blue, the yards, the studding sail booms away from the years ago. And across 3,000 miles of sea came the voices of the men hauling in chorus, echoes from the past answering the lamentable crying of the gulls. And now the Tamalpais went to pieces, became a curl of smoke, vanished, and he was on the wharves of Marseille in a bar standing before a zinc counter, a Chopin of wine and a girl. That was it. The girl. Some piece of grit had been irritating his mind for the last few minutes. Something behind his laziness and happiness had been working for his discomfort. We all know that feeling when the subconscious self is grumbled or worrying or over something that the conscious self has forgotten for a moment. Anisette was the name she went by. A pale-faced, undersized girl. You would not possibly have looked at her twice, but had you done so you would, were you a man, certainly have looked at her a 3rd time. She was of the type that appeals to a man's passions, never to his heart, and she stood at the bar of the Riga where the Swedes and Norwegians congregate, and there Yves and Gaspard had fallen in with her, and she had favoured Yves. The big blonde Yves had captured this little pirate who had sailed for years unharmed and harmful. She had scorned Gaspard, who would have given his hand for a glance from her, and she had given herself wholly to Yves. Had he loved the woman with a pure and simple love, Gaspard might have forgiven Yves, his bosom companion, for the victory. His affection for Yves was one of those brotherly loves that ennoble a man, and the Moko were capable, perhaps, of splendid abnegation. But Yves had crossed him in his passions, and the Moko was a man who could never forgive that. High, high, high. Girl and bar and Riga tavern vanished, giving place to Marseille harbour with the Rhone thrashing her way out. A passenger had given Yves a cigar. It was always the way. Yves had all the luck. If there was a cigar or a drink going, it always fell to Yves, or a girl. Yet he, Gaspard, had saved this man's life. Now, on board ship, at work, all these grumblings would have been there in the heart of Gaspard, but they would have been undeveloped. Here, in idleness, they grew, and to visualize the awful power of woman, it is enough to make your mental standpoint the apex of a vast triangle. The other 2 angles of which are Anisette, serving drinks in the tobacco-smelling bar of the Riga, and the Moko, beneath the palm trees, warring in thought against his bosom friend Yves. A great crab fell with a thud on the sand beside Gaspard, who sprang half erect to find himself face to face with Yves. The Ponantaise was laughing. He had caught the crab amidst the rocks. He had 2 more under his arm, their claws tied together with a string. He had found a boat sail from the Rhone and a small spar out of which he intended to make a tent. He flung the lot on the sand and then sat down beside his companion, took out his pipe, filled it, lit it, and began to smoke. The Moko, after his exclamation of surprise, had fallen back in his old position, and the 2 men smoked without exchanging a word. They would go like this for a long time without speaking a word. One might have fancied them enemies, or at least put out by one another. But not at all. They were simply sharing the tremendous taciturnity of their species. All who help in the labor of the sea share in its weariness. Vastus silentio, the motto, is written on the waves. High, high, high. The breeze had freshened a bit, giving life and energy to the calling of the gulls. The Moko, his pipe out, pushed his cap back from his eyes and sat up. See here, said Yves. You know over there where I fetched these things from? Well, over there I found something. Chapter 2. A Secret of the Sea. bien? The big Yves laughed in his beard and dug his naked toes into the hot white sand luxuriously. Gaspard was shod, for he had turned in all standing just before the disaster of the ship. But Yves, more particular or less tired, had kicked his shoes off. Bien? Something funny, Mordieu. Yes, when you see it, you'll stare. Well, what is it? If you keep on like an old woman, if you find anything funnier than yourself, it would be queer. Well, then, come and look and you will see. Eves rose to his feet, kicking the crabs into a heap, spread the sail on the sand, and placing the crabs in the sail, made a bundle of them. Having tied the bundle with a rope, he placed it in the shadow of the palms. That will keep them safe till we come back, said Eves, alone. He led the way right across the islet to the north. It was scarcely a quarter of a mile wide, this islet, and covered from shore edge to shore edge with thick bay cedar bushes rising to the knees. The only trees on it were palms. Those 7 palms gathered in the clump beneath whose shade the Moko had been lying. The breeze, which had freshened momentarily, had now died again, and as they tramped through the dense growth, the sun, now passing into the western sky, struck them on their left side so that they could have sworn they were walking side-turned to an open furnace door. But they were used to heat, and neither of them grumbled, or only occasionally the Moko. Well, this is a nice tramp to see something funny. It seems to me the funny thing is that we should be sweating ourselves like this. If you could show me a decent bar at the end of our journey. Come on, replied Eves. You will not be sorry when you see it. The sea to the eastward of the island was heavily sown with reefs. The great reefs that had destroyed the Rhone lay due south. Northward there were also reefs. Only to the west was the approach to the island safe. Here we are, said Eves as he tramped his way out of the bushes and onto the northern beach, the Moko following. Yes, there were reefs here indeed. Just a dark bloom under the blue water, just a trace of snow, a penciling of foam showed where the murderers of the sea lay hidden. And the sea was beautiful here, more beautiful than to the south of the island, for the reefs and the shallows were continually changing in the wonderful light of the tropics to suit the hour of the day. Colors chasing colors. Sky blue parallels of sea and heather purple lines of reef greeting the dawn. Cornflower-coloured spaces of water flashing the sky back like mirrors at noon, whilst at sunset in those wonderful sunsets that reached to the zenith. All the stretch of sea and reef would be a field of beaten gold. Just as the ever-changing light of day made ever-changing beauties, so did the ever-changing air and the ever-changing tide. At low tide with a strong breeze, every reef would speak and you would hear a sound that once heard you would never forget. The song of 100 tiny shores, the tune of the reefs. Sometimes in these great low tides in which we fancy the moon and the sun hauling together at the heavy blue robes of the sea, as if to make her show her hidden armor and her scars, the reefs would be fully exposed, razor-edged, hungry and lean. In these low tides you would see great fish betrayed by the sea and trapped in the pools, flinging themselves in the air like curved silver swords. Conversely, in the great high tides, you might have sailed a battleship in fancy over the unclouded water. Eves, leaving the beach, began to clamber along a ledge of rock that went straight out from the shore like a natural pier. Gaspard followed him, treading the seaweed underfoot. There were no gulls here. The fishing ground of the gulls lay to the southeast, but so small was the island that you could still hear their voices on the air that had now become absolutely windless. The water lay deep and clear on the left ledge of the rocks, but Gaspard had eyes for nothing but the slippery seaweed underfoot. These reefs are as a rule so rough, so serrated with keen-edged spines of coral, that barefooted, as Eves was, to walk on them would be impossible. But this great ledge was comparatively smooth. It lay above high tide for the first 100 yards or so, and then, shelving slightly, lost itself at high tide beneath the water. The tide since its turn had already fallen 2 feet, and the hidden part of the reef was beginning to show. It was plain to the eye that the whole reef formed the edge of an immense bath-like basin, an elliptiform lagoon, the longest diameter of which lay from north to south. Eves led the way till they were 50 yards from the shore. Then he stopped and turned, pointed into the green clear water to the left. The lagoon, unruffled by a breath of wind, lay lit to its heart and burning like a vast and flawless emerald. Its floor of salt white sand, though invisible to the eye, was still reached by the sun rays and flung them back in a million sparkles that combined to form the water's dazzling soul. 20 feet out from the reef lay what at first seemed a flat-topped, reed-grown rock. The tide was slowly uncovering it, and the ribbons of seaweed growing from it waved in the aquamarine of the water, as grass or land foliage waves in a gentle wind. The rock, weed-grown, and emerging from the water, had for a base a column thicker than a man's body. A column here dazzling bright and flower-coloured, here dim and darkened with growing fucus, a column whose lowermost part was lost in the vagueness of the lagoon. The Moko, who had flung himself down and was leaning over the reef edge so as to see better, gave a start. His sailor's eye, after the first surprise, saw through the mystery of the rock, growing like a hideous flower on a coloured stalk. The rock was the foretop of a ship. The column was a coral-crossed mast. But the mystery dispelled, it was as nothing to the mystery half unveiled. To the Moko, who combined in himself the imagination of the southern man and the imagination of the sailor, this hint of a ship in the still and silent water appealed more forcibly than the full sight of a wreck on a thunderous beach. The coral-crusted mast led the eye down till the sight found the pale, fish-like form of the ship itself. "Amazing," cried the Moko. "'Tis as thick as a funnel." Then he was silent, as was Eve's, and lying side by side on the grey dead coral of the reef, they contemplated the column of living coral that once had formed the mast of a ship. The ship lay below unharmed as to her forepart, else the mast would not have been left standing. Driven years ago by some great wave, she must have passed at one stride of the sea, over the circling reef of the lagoon, to sink, the water pouring through her shattered timbers, and lie lost here forever. Or in these past days there may have been a break in the reef built up long ago by the restless coral. How she had found her resting place, who could say? What had been her business, who could tell? But trumpets could not have proclaimed doom and death more poignantly than did the awful silence, the vagueness into which the mast sank and wavered towards the ghostly ship. For 8 feet or so below the foretop, the mast was dressed with seaweed, showing only here and there the white of the coral crust. Below that the seaweed did not grow. The 8 feet indicated the rise and fall of the tide, for the lagoon, though showing no break in its encircling reef, communicated through 20 unseen openings with the outer sea, and filled and emptied to high and low water like a great colander. Flights of painted fishes flashed now and then through the water and vanished, the seaweeds growing from the mast showing waving as if to a submarine wind, now like dark brown ribbons of shadow, now like a drowned woman's hair powdered with sparkling blossoms. Now a tress of vivid green would be loosened by the fingers of the outgoing tide, catch a sunbeam and show its beauty, or a tress of amber. As they watched as the tide sank lower, inch by inch and foot by foot, the hidden portion of the mast, jeweled with coral and sea growths, stole more clearly into view, and foot by foot the seaweed portion beneath the foretop stole from the water and stood dripping, dank and dismal in the sun. Clearer and clearer like a grey cloud, fish-shaped and enormous in the green below the ghost ship, began to unveil herself to the sight. It was like the coming of a ghost, a thing most dim yet wonderful to be seen. One could trace the mast now right down to the deck. It sprang from a coloured column from which here and there grew great sea fans that seemed made from dark lace, and strewn here and there with all the colours from the brilliant red of tiny starfish to the delicate peach bloom of the flat lichen coral, so rich, so delicate, so opulent in colour it might have been the column of some fairy palace, this old foremast of a forgotten ship. The two men, taking comfortable positions on the reef, had lit their pipes. Hour after hour they sat smoking, interchanging a few words, but always with their eyes alive for changes in the water below. Now, forgetting to smoke, they lay on their elbows looking down into the green depth where, the stronger through the shallowing water, sharper, clearer, the ship began to show her form, hideous to the sight as the form of a man bloated by disease, grey, enormous, muffled with coral, tufted with what seemed fungus growths. "Look," said Eve, pointing down to where the fantastically high poop was humping itself into view. "Saw you ever a ship built in that fashion floating on the sea?" Why, she's from the time of Noah. In the church at Paimpole, they have a model ship like that. She was dedicated to the Virgin in the old days. Let us look, growled Demoko, speaking as if irritated by the voice of his companion. Then he hung silent, his eyes fixed on the vision developing below. The tide had sunk now to within a foot of low water mark, and the veil of water lessened, so did the vision strengthen. One could make out the decks clearly, all rough with coral, and the coral banks that were once the bulwarks. A stump of mainmast was left and had become converted into a cone of coral the height of a man. Trace of mizzenmast there was none. Chapter 3. Evening. All this time, steadily as the tide, the sun had been sinking. He had dropped through a dazzling azure sky, and he was now hanging almost in touch with the western horizon, a ball of fire in a sky of dazzling gold. Momently, the gold of the sunset took possession of the sky, spreading up until the very zenith was reached, and down till the gilding reached the eastern skyline. The world now seemed clipping to the cup of a great golden flower, and the little ripples that came sighing in round the low tide reefs showed their foam like fleeces of gold. Not a trace of cloud showed in this golden sky, not a wave on the golden sea. In that wonderful sunset, the palm tops burned like fingers of flame, and as music lights the soul of man, so did the golden and glowing atmosphere the heart of the lagoon. The ship in the water below answered to the magic of the light. The thing that had been grey and dismal as death was in a moment transformed to a dream of colour. The brains of frost-white coral became golden lamps. Starfish, sea flowers, coralline growths, pink, crimson, indigo, pale yellow, colour and form, all led their adornment. Shadowless on her bed of dazzling sand, she hung for a moment, burning in full sight, clear to the eye, as though she were floating in air and exquisite as a jewel. And then, just as she had bloomed, she faded out, her colour and beauty passing with the fading light, and as night swept over the sea like a shadow of a violent wing, she vanished utterly. Whilst the lagoon filled with darkness and the first stars cast their shimmer on the surface. "Eh bien," said Eves as he rose to his feet and stretched himself. The Moko, who had also risen to his feet, looked around him at the world of darkness that had displaced the world of gold. He had seen many things, but nothing had ever struck his imagination so vividly as the sight now veiled by darkness. His mind could not reason on the question or refute by logic the feeling in his heart that what is seen was evil. All that gaiety and colour decking the ruin of man's work was like laughter coming from under the seas. Eves felt nothing of this. "Come," said the Moko, turning towards the shore. "Let's go back." As they tramped their way through the brushwood, they talked of the thing they had seen. Each thought from the height of her poop she must be very old, or it might be that it was only a very big deckhouse, snowed over with coral. He slapped his thigh as he walked, pleased with the idea of the snow. When a boy in Brittany, he had seen things heaped with snow and bulked out in size. Carts, barrels, and so forth, just as the old ship was heaped and bulked out with coral. But the simile was lost on Gaspard. You do not get snow at Montpellier to any extent. Also his mind, more trained by the early education and more supple by heredity, refused to draw images from gross bulk. The colours appealed to him. "Mordieu," said he, "she reminds me of a ship of flowers I once saw drawn along in the carnival procession at Montpellier." "Flowers?" laughed Eves. "Where would you get flowers under the sea?" The stupidity of Eves aroused Gaspard's ever-ready anger. "From the devil, maybe. I was not talking of flowers under the sea. I was talking of what I'd seen in Montpellier." They had reached the southern beach where the palm trees grew, and Eves set about lighting a fire of dry brushwood. When it was burning, he heaped on some wreckwood, the ship of coral, the wreck of the Rhone, their position. All were banished from his mind by the business in hand. When supper was finished, they sat each with his back against a palm tree. The work of the day was over. They had rigged up a rough sort of tent with the boat sail and some broken spars, but the warm night held them in the open. The red light of the fire lit the white sand to within a few yards of the sea edge, where the waves were falling gently, rhythmically, drowsily, Hush, hush, hush. A chill and dreamy sound. Above the sky, solid with stars, voiceless, windless, seemed a thing more alive and active than the sea. From the slight elevation where they sat, a ghostly white streak on the starlit sea to the southward indicated the reef that had slain the Rhone. Only at low tide and halfway between flood and ebb tide did the snow of the surf indicate the position of the murderer. She had a lot of gold in her for Havana, said Eves, breaking silence and nodding in the direction of the leaf. Seems a pity that it should be lying there under the sea and no one to spend it. See here, said Gaspard. It's strange. I was thinking of that hooker lying in the lagoon over there. Yes? I was thinking maybe there is stuff worth looking for aboard her if one could get at it. Eves laughed. Eves laughed. Yes, if you could get at it. If you could get at it, and she built over with coral a foot thick, and if you could break through it, what would you find? Dead men's bones. It's like your flowers under the sea. He tapped the dottle out of his pipe, rose, stretched, and turned towards the little tent, whilst Gaspard, without a word, continued smoking. He could have struck Eves. The son of a tradesman in Montpellier, he possessed still some rudiments of the education he had received before that fatal day when, driven by the instinct of wandering and the hatred of restraint, he had run away to sea. Eves, the son of a long generations of sailors, had gone to sea as a duckling goes to the pond. Gaspard had been taken there by his imagination. He knew himself superior to the lumbering Eves, whose fingers were like fishhooks, who had the manners of a bear and the walk of a walrus. Yet Eves was always proving himself, by chance no doubt, the better and the luckier man. He turned in under the shelter of the tent where Eves was already snoring, and he slept and dreamt of the docks of Marseille, of Anisette, and of Eves. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert Bakumiku. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.